Today was a good day for the Obama re-election campaign, but it was a tough day for the Democratic Party. The good news for the Obama campaign is that the Republicans running for president continue to savage each other. Newt Gingrich is saying the worst things he can think of about Mitt Romney, comparing him to Ted Kennedy. Romney is comparing Gingrich to Lucille Ball, and influential conservative columnist Bill Kristol is now officially begging someone, anyone, to run for the Republican nomination for president. As the Republicans continue to attack each other, they continue to drive up the negatives of every Republican running for president, something Newt Gingrich had always insisted Republicans should not do, right up until he started doing it himself. As President Obama's re-election continues to look more likely with the help of the Republicans, his ability to govern in a second term was hurt today when it became a bit more likely that those same Republicans will take control of the United States Senate next year. Senator Ben Nelson, the Democrat from Nebraska, where Democrats are an endangered species, made this announcement today.
It's time for me to step away from elective office, spend more time with my family, and look for new ways to serve our state and nation. Therefore, I'm announcing today that I will not seek re-election. Simply put, it's time to move on.
Nelson, who won re-election in 2006 with a miraculous 64% of the Nebraska vote, will be virtually impossible for the Democrats to replace in Nebraska. In fact, the situation is so hopeless in Nebraska that the Democrats are looking to New York for a solution. That is where Bob Kerrey, former Democratic governor of Nebraska and former senator from Nebraska, who held Nelson's seat before him, now lives.
Former Nebraska Democratic Senator Bob Kerrey is considering a run. You know, you mentioned the word difficult. It was going to be very difficult for Democrats to hold on to this seat had Ben Nelson actually stayed and run for re-election. It's going to be difficult for them to still be able to win it, probably even harder. But if they can get someone like Bob Kerrey, at least it makes it competitive for them.
I called Bob Kerrey as soon as the Ben Nelson news broke today. It took him a few seconds to understand what I was calling about, since it turned out I had awakened him at 2 a.m. in India. He said that he would love to move back to Nebraska, that he's often thought about moving back to Nebraska. He's thought about it lately, but he has not thought about planning a race for the Senate there. Which we were at the last, so which means at the last word here, we officially interpret as, at least at 2 o'clock in the morning in India, while half awake, Bob Kerrey is leaving the door open. Bob Kerrey also said he thought Ben Nelson's retirement was a big loss for Nebraska. That was not exactly the sentiment of a Senate Democratic leadership aide who told NBC News, quote, "Nelson will be the least missed member of the Democratic caucus next year." That certainly echoes the feelings of many liberals who have been frustrated with Nelson's unreliability as a supporter of the Democratic leadership's agenda in the Senate. But there would be no Democratic leadership agenda in the Senate if the Democrats were not the majority party. The last Democratic president, Bill Clinton, had 2 Democrats in the Senate from Nebraska when he began his term. President Obama was lucky to have even one. Ben Nelson cast the most important vote that a senator can cast when he voted for this man for majority leader. Ben Nelson has voted with the Democrats 82% of the time this year. The Republican senator from Nebraska has voted with the Democrats 8% of the time this year. That is what's at stake in Democrats holding on in any way they can to that Nebraska Senate seat. A Nebraska Democrat cannot possibly vote like a New York Democrat in the Senate and expect to hold on to that seat. If Bob Kerrey doesn't run for that seat, Nebraska is virtually certain to elect another Republican to the Senate who will vote for Mitch McConnell for majority leader and vote against the Democratic agenda, if there is one, at least 90% of the time. As frustrated as liberals have a right to be with Ben Nelson, they also have much to thank Ben Nelson for. Such is the complexity of the politics of governing. Ben Nelson managed to hold on to a Democratic Senate seat in a state where George W. Bush beat John Kerry by 33 points, in a state where John McCain beat Barack Obama by 15 points. Republicans were always desperate to get Ben Nelson out of the Democratic majority in the Senate. In 2004, before the Democrats got the majority, Karl Rove saw it coming and he offered Ben Nelson the job of Agriculture Secretary. That would have allowed Nebraska's Republican governor to pick Nelson's replacement, giving the Republicans a Senate seat. Ben Nelson turned it down. If Ben Nelson had accepted that job, in 2006, Democrats would have fallen exactly one seat short of winning control of the Senate, Ben Nelson's seat. In 2012, the Republicans need to pick up just 4 Senate seats to win back control of the Senate if they can hold on to all 10 of their incumbent Republican Senate seats. The Democrats now have 8 difficult seats to defend, including Nebraska. The Republicans only need to win half of those seats. Mitch McConnell's road to majority leader just got a little bit easier today, and the prospects of President Obama being able to govern in a second term got a little bit harder today. Joining me now, our MSNBC analyst Richard Wolff, author of Revival, The Struggle for Survival Inside the Obama White House, and MSNBC analyst Karen Finney, former DNC communications director. Karen, speak to this question of the complexity of the politics of governing versus the politics of campaigning. In campaigning, you can just leave the opponent, dead by the side of the road. But the complexity in the politics of governing is the person who is in your way today may be your ally tomorrow, which is something that Harry Reid always knew about Ben Nelson. Yeah, he's not with me on this vote today, but he's with me most of the time. That's something that it seems to me the retail consumer of our politics out there, viewers of this show and others, have trouble grasping.
You know what? I think people understand it. They just don't like it and just don't understand that.
There's that.
But just don't get that, like in the building behind me, as we well know, that's how it is. And if we want to change that, then there are some other things we could be doing. But absolutely, think about the number of times. It's true when you think about Joe Lieberman, right? It's sort of like we hate the fact that we need him, but the truth is we need him to caucus with the Democrats to get us to the numbers that we need to get to be in the majority. I think, though, with regard to Ben Nelson specifically, while obviously him voting for the health care legislation and certain other things that, you mentioned 82% is helpful, I don't think the math actually changes all that much either for the Democrats or the Republicans in the DSCC or the NRSC. In that, I think the Republicans were expecting this was going to be a pickup for them, and I think it was always going to be a hard seat for Democrats. And the one thing in the math that I think is potentially helpful is that we've got, Ben Nelson sitting on $3 million that could be used towards whoever the Democrat might be. And I think it may be an ugly Republican primary. I still think, though, it's going to be a very tough seat for Democrats to hold on to. And it means, we got to start looking other places and not just worrying and thinking about what can we hold on to, but how do we actually change the nature of the map a little bit?
Absolutely. The map really has to be studied. Now, Richard, I would think that I see a difference between the Ben Nelsons of the Democratic Party and the Joe Liebermans. Let's remember, Joe Lieberman, to hold on to his seat, needed to get reelected in that right-wing state of Connecticut, where getting reelected for a Democrat is a whole different ballgame than getting reelected in Nebraska. And so the passes I'd be willing to give to a Ben Nelson or a Nebraska or a Montana senator, say, in order for them to hold on to their seat, are different from the way I'd feel about a Connecticut senator.
Right, and there's another factor you've got to put in there as well, which is the personal politics. Joe Lieberman has had what you can only describe as a personal problem with Barack Obama, and that's played out in his votes and how difficult he's been for this president. Ben Nelson, and this may seem strange, but Ben Nelson back in 2006 would only invite one Democrat to campaign with him. Not many people know this, but that one Democrat was actually Barack Obama in the time when he was seen as a centrist, experienced moderate in the party. Nelson was very happy to be seen, even though, let's face it, there's not a lot of diversity in Nebraska, but he was very happy to campaign with him, got a big event, a big response, and obviously people's attitudes in Nebraska to President Obama have shifted over the years, and Nelson was going to face a re-election fight with some of the nice things he'd said about the president thrown back in his face. But that personal politics meant that he also had some leeway, I think, with this White House, because he had been good to Obama and Lieberman hadn't. That's another big contrast between the two of them.
Karen, am I wrong to be feeling more confident about the president's reelection as the Republicans continue to attack each other and less confident about Harry Reid's ability to hold on to a Democratic Senate?
I think we don't yet know what the story of the Senate is going to be. I'm actually a little bit more optimistic. I agree with you that I think that the president's reelection prospects continue to look better every day that the Republicans put their faces on television and open their mouths to talk. So certainly that has been helpful. But I think with regard to the Senate, I mean, again, I think that we have to kind of pay attention to what's going on with voters. I feel like one of the lessons that I learned last time after 20 years in politics during the 2008 cycle is that voters are very unpredictable. And I think they will, again, this cycle, be very unpredictable. They're angry. They're frustrated. When people are angry and frustrated, they do things that are not predicted all the time by polls. And so I think we're going to have to pay closer attention. Now, one thing I will say when it comes to the Senate race and just in general, the idea that we're talking about Bob Kerrey, have great respect for him, but I think it shows the wholly shameful inadequacy that my party has done in actually developing talent further down the bench. We should not be talking about somebody who hasn't lived in the state for 10 years as a way to try to hold on to the leadership in the Senate.
Absolutely. It seems it's always that way with the Democrats. When one of these vacancies opens up, there's a sense of panic, and because they haven't done that homework you're talking about. Richard, and the stakes here for President Obama are high. A Republican Senate loses Pat Leahy as the guy who's running your Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court justices and replaces him with Jeff Sessions, who I don't even know if he would give the president's nominees a hearing.
Well, you've got to assume that the honeymoon lasts for a couple of days at least. But, hey, this president had a hard time getting many of his nominees through a democratically controlled Senate for all sorts of extraneous tax issues, some of them serious and some of them really not serious at all. So it is unpredictable. But, let's also not underestimate the Republicans' abilities to shoot themselves in the foot here. Harry Reid was looking at a terrible set of prospects in the last election. The Republicans chose a Tea Party candidate. There's a Jim DeMint back candidate in Nebraska. That could also come back and hurt them. So very hard at this point to say, okay, we know where this is going, because Nevada looked horrible for Democrats 2 years ago.
Thank you, Richard Wolff, for that sign of hope. I forgot about the Tea Party's ability to throw away Republican wins in the Senate. Karen Finney, Richard Wolff, thank you both very much for joining me tonight.
Thanks. Lawrence.